Shalom Chaverim. Today is Torah portion, double portion, Behar-Bechukotai, even though we're going to mainly look at Behar, and we're going to do it together with some Musar, some Rabbi Israel Salanter, and a little bit of Mesilat Yesharim. But let's begin with the story, with a sipur. So, in Vilna, there was a very poor shoemaker named Motel. And Motel the shoemaker was really indeed very poor and every day did not know where his next meal would come from. One day, unexpectedly, he received a large inheritance from some distant relative and became very rich. Became so rich that he was a very important and well-known person in the town. And then his son, his own son, got a shidduch. Basically, there was a matchmaking between him and the town's rabbi's daughter. Now, that was a really big deal. So there was a big wedding, and all the most important people in the town were there. And the former shoemaker, Motel, was standing there proud and cannot believe as he stares as the new father-in-law, the rabbi, who's now going to join that family. And then a different shoemaker, one who is still poor, one that was holding a lot of grudge about the sudden wealth that befell Motel, came to him while he was standing under the chuppah and said, "My shoe ripped. Do you think you can repair it? And how much it would cost me?" And Motel got so embarrassed that he started shaking and he fainted. And they called the doctor and everyone were tending to him and there was a big commotion. But alas, Motel died. And this story met the ears of Rabbi Israel of Salanter, and there and then he decided to found the Musar movement. Okay, so now this is a folktale that is usually cited with the reason the Musar movement was found, the movement for the correction of human behavior and of midot, of virtues, The founding of the movement is associated with Rabbi Israel of Salant. Salant, that's the name of the city in Lithuania, but he is known as Rabbi Israel Salanter. He was born in 1810 and died in 1883. Now, this is a really nice story, but in actuality, that was not the reason why Salanter founded the movement. Salanter founded the movement according to historical account because of a rabbi that really influenced him that was named Rabbi Yosef Zondel, who was a student of Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. Rabbi Yosef Zondel was one who cared deeply about Musar, and Israel Lipkin was very influenced by him. So that was more the reason how all of this unfolded, but it's a nice story nonetheless. What is Musar, okay, or Musar in modern Hebrew? So in modern Hebrew, actually, the word Musar means ethics. Okay, so when we talk about Immanuel Kant, we will say הצו הקטגורי של המוסר. Okay, so like Musar is just ethics, right? However, the word Musar, as it appears in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, and it appears about 50 times, is not in that context of ethic, but more in the context of correcting and educating. So it comes from the root of to correct, to educate, and very interestingly, it also comes from the root of suffering. So Musar comes from the root of Yasar, of Yesurim, of suffering. So I think it's very interesting that corrections and education ties to suffering, and even there's another root in there, which is the root for binding. like asur asir, which is a prisoner. So it's a really, really interesting word. And the Musar movement adapted this word based on its biblical meaning. So, but before we go deeper into Musar, into Salanter, let's talk a little bit about our Torah portion and how it connects. So, I want to talk about Behar out of the double portion. And Behar, just really briefly, is a portion that's mainly known for the idea or the mitzvot of Shemitah and Yovel, basically the Shemitah and the Jubilee. So every 7th year and the 50th year. And this is about how we reset our work on the land. We drop the land on the 7th year and don't harvest it, don't work it, don't reap, so nothing. And the 50th year is when all land returns to its original ownership, debt is forgiven, slaves are set free. So it's a very, very powerful portion. But I want to focus today on the last verse, the very, very last verse of Behar. And it goes like this. את שבתותיי תשמורו ומקדשי תיראו, אני אדוני. Okay, it's a very simple verse that ends this Torah portion that says, you shall keep my Shabbats, my Sabbath, and sanctify my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Now, the Talmud in Yevamot, in Masechet Yevamot, asks, and this is a very important question, יכול יהיה בניין בית המקדש דוחה שבת? תלמוד לומר, את שבתותיי תשמורו ומקדשי תיראו, כולכם חייבים בכבודי. Okay, what did the Talmudic sages ask? One might have thought that building of the temple should override Shabbat. Okay, so by this verse we might understood that we should keep the Shabbat, but as we engage in the building of the tabernacle, we are exempt. Why? Because we're dealing with holy work. All right, so so this brings a really, really big question. Are we exempt of mitzvot? Are we exempt of commandments if we are engaged in a spiritual endeavor? This is, if you think about it, a very dangerous notion. And so we mentioned the Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who basically warned against the same thing. And Volozhin used to say that this whole kind of like a direct spiritual instinct of worshiping Adonai was something that our forefathers had. That, Abraham, Isaac, and them, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, our forefathers and foremothers. And that was all good before we received the Torah in Mount Sinai. They could actually worship Adonai directly in this way. However, from the moment we received the Torah, the mitzvot take priority. However, and now I want to get a little bit into the politics of the era, because this is very, very important understanding about the foundation of the Musar movement. There were several things that happened to ignite that movement politically, if you will. So first of all, the Musar movement was founded in Lithuania, and it was basically an addition to the Jewish practice of what we also know as mitnagdim. Okay, so to understand that, what were the mitnagdim? So earlier in Poland, in neighboring Poland, there came the Hasidut, okay, the Hasidic movement, in which, and I'm not going to get into it right now in length, but basically what it was is that there were many, many poor people who did not have access to literacy, to the learning of the Torah, who were basically feeling left out of the worship, as it were. Came the Baal Shem Tov, according to legends, and started to connect and engage through stories and through personal connections and through a very, very important principle called dvekut, which means an attachment to Hashem, to Adonai, which is direct and is emotional, and everyone can access it. And needless to say, this was a really, really big revolution that The result of it was the creating of many Rebbe's courts, of leaders of all of this Hasidic movement. And that, of course, brought a lot of backlash from a different part of the Jewish world for many different reasons. The main ones are, how dare you not prioritize the studying of Torah? And the second one, how dare you worship a Rebbe? Or basically put upon you leaders that you follow as if they were godly. It's nothing short of idolatry. So the mitnagdim, the word mitnagdim means it comes from the root from against, okay? So or counter or going against. So this is really a movement that was strengthening against that phenomenon of the Hasidut. So as you can imagine, it was very, very rigorous. It was very rigorous, it was very cerebral, it was all about an intense and dedicated learning. But the biggest threat for the Mitnagdim movement, or for the Lithuanian way of practicing Judaism, was not the Hasidut, because they prevailed against it, at least in Lithuania. The biggest threat on them was another movement called Haskalah, which translates to Jewish enlightenment, or it's basically what Jewish enlightenment is. So enlightenment, as we know, did not pass the Jewish people and influenced it a lot. And where the yeshivas of the Mitnagdim started to weaken and dwindle, it was because of Jewish people who were schooled and who have valued education and who were literate, starting to read philosophy, starting to read, to engage in science, starting to be very, very tempted into the massive secularization of society that happened at that time. So Musar was, in a way, almost like a revolution that meant to shuffle things up and bring new and exciting spirit into those yeshivas. And the first person to recognize it was actually Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who did start to put in the daily practice a little bit, just a little bit of Musar work as a part of his yeshiva. He was the teacher of Zondel, who then influenced Israel Salanter, but Salanter took it a lot further. So let's talk about Salanter for a second. First of all, he's considered what we would call Ilui. What is Ilui? Is a student that very early on, you look at, today we would say gifted, but I would even say highly gifted, a kid that amazes you, a kid that immediately could quote you masachtot and has an understanding and has chidushim. It's like basically bringing innovation, right? And trust me, as an educator, once in several years is when I meet a student where I'm like, whoa, this could be Ilui. It's very, very rare. And Salanter was one. He was an Ilui. He was considered a true genius. And he was very, very well read, and he knew a lot. But he did care about people's behavior. And like the story about the shoemaker, there's, all those stories come from a reason, right? He noticed that there's a problem. He noticed that there's a problem where people lost their way. So where Salanter took it to, when I said earlier that he took it further, what it means is that he developed a method of practicing Musar that was not only new and exciting, it was also very, very groundbreaking and very ahead of its time. And here I'm going to quote first from Or Israel, which is the main book of his writings. And I think that you will quickly understand why it was so groundbreaking and ahead of its time. So this is from Or Israel. כי הלא לימוד המוסר הוא בתור רפואה למחלת הנפש, ובהכרח צריך שתקדם בקרב לבב האדם, ולזה גופה לא נדרש חשבונות רבים מחשבון הנפש. Okay? What does it mean? It says that the study of Musar is like a cure for mental illness. For this, the human needs a lot more than the accounting of what they are aware of. So, those of you with a sharp ear can see here, whoa, here is psychoanalysis a lot earlier than Freud's first important writing, because what Salanter is talking about is what we are aware of and what we are not aware of. And if you take it to the Jewish world, it says like, yes, even the most, amazing scholars are aware of what the mitzvot that we need to do. But that awareness doesn't help at all, because what drives us is something else. What drives us is something that we are not aware of. Okay, and that is very revolutionary. And if you want your minds to be more blown, here's another quote from Or Israel. Get this. אהבת האדם לצאצאיו כהים המה, וכמעט ברוב העיתים אינם נרגשים להאדם עצמו, ובהתעוררות קטנה תתלהב לאש בוערת. By the way, it's beautiful and very high kind of fancy Hebrew. תאוות האדם המה הכהים, אשר בלי התעוררות מה כמעט אינם נרגשים, ולזאת גדול כוחם למשול באדם. And now the translation. A person's love of his descendants is a dark force. Usually, the person does not even sense it. But with the slightest provocation, it blazes up into a fiery flame. Human desires are shadowy. Without some stimulus, they are hardly felt. Yet their power is so great that they rule over the person. So what he talked about is dark forces and bright forces, or as is written, kochot kehim and kochot behirim. So the conscience and the unconscious, the dark forces are the unconscious. And he really, if you think of Freud's eros and superego and all of those concepts, it is exactly this. It is what drives us, what motivates our entire behavior is the eros, is those things that are in our conscience, is our suppressed, and our superego is what is on the surface, or what Salanter would call the kochot beirim. So it's pretty cool. So what did Salanter say we should do about it? So he said what we should do, we should strive to penetrate those dark forces, basically to access the unconscious. How do we do that? So his idea, or his method, was to do it by persistence and repetition. Now, mind you, this is hard and rigorous work. So the way to do it was to basically look at a midah, a trait or virtue in yourself that you need work on. Okay, so let's say you are quick to anger, or you have a problem with pride, or you're a big gossiper. Okay, so take something that you know that you need work, and then take one work of Musar that is an old work of Musar, which could be Chovot Alvavot by Behar. We talked about that one, or it could be Mesilat Yesharim by Luzzatto. Find the lines that basically deal with that duty, with that trait, with that midah that you need to correct, and repeat them like what we would call today a mantra. Say it again and again and again and again and again. Bring yourself to ecstasy, sometimes with cry, sometimes basically train yourself and do it in an irrational way, because he understood that those dark forces of what we need to correct is not going to come from understanding. It is not rational. So find an irrational way to access those dark forces and correct that whatever trait it is, whatever problem you have at the root by this repetition. And this is just, I want to, so Mesilat Yesharim, by Luzzatto, this could be a whole column of its own, so I'm not going to get into it, but I just wanted to read to you from the introduction, which is very famous and very beautiful for Mesilat Yesharim, because in a way it talks exactly about what Salanter was talking about. And look at Lutzato, the beginning of Mesilat Yesharim. אמר המחבר, החיבור הזה לא חיברתיו ללמד לבני האדם את אשר לא ידעו, אלא להזכירם את הידוע להם כבר, ומפורסם אצלם פרסום גדול, כי לא תמצא ברוב דבריי אלא דברים שרוב בני האדם יודעים אותם ולא מסתפקים בהם כלל. אלא שכפי רוב פרסומם הוא כנגד מה שאמיתתם גלויה לכל כך, ההיעלם מהם מצוי מאוד והשכחה רבה. Really beautiful translation. And by the way, this copy here that's for Inder Nister is in Hebrew and in English. See, Hebrew and English. So I don't know. I think there's one copy, so come here and snatch it if you want. Okay, so the writer says, I have written this work not to teach men what they do not know, but to remind them of what they already know and is very evident to them. For you will find in most of my words only things which most people know, and concerning which they entertain no doubts. But to the extent that they are well known and their truths revealed to all, so is forgetfulness in relation to them extremely prevalent. So, so even Mesilat Yesharim said, look, it's basically what Salanter said, that we all know those things. I mean, he says in the beginning of the book, this book is not come to tell you anything new, but it comes to remind you what you already know. So what Salanter says, yes, this is the purpose of this book, right? So take this and drill it so hard so it gets into your dark forces and you can actually change. Now, that concept, of course, like any concept, got a lot of backlash when it was new. But eventually it prevailed. And especially after the First World War, it was very successful. And it was all wiped out, of course, in the Holocaust, all of those yeshivas that used to practice it. Now, you have to understand what Israel Salanter did is that he built what is called Musar houses or Bate Musar, where you can only practice Musar. And why is this important? Because the practice of Musar is very loud and emotional and intense, and sometimes musical. It doesn't fit the environment of yeshiva, so you need to be in a secluded place to do it. So he started all of these houses. Eventually, there were 3 big yeshivas that came out of it. Of course, everything was wiped in the Holocaust, but those yeshivas moved to Israel, then to the United States, and they still practice Musar to some extent. And the 3 big ones were Kelm, Slovodka, and Novardok. And they each had a slight different style of practicing Musar, but in the most intense of it, if you would get, for example, into a Novardok yeshiva at the time, you would see, it's really funny that they used to call it the Bursa, which is what we call today the stock market, but you used to see students run back and forth in commotion and chant and cry verses to each other and mantras, just again and again and again, working on a certain trait or helping another student work on a certain issue. And it would be just a mutual cacophony of crying and screaming and running around. Really, really intense. But to conclude, I wanted to say something that is very important to understand today, because there's a renewed interest in Musar. And interestingly enough, Musar came as an addition to the most rigorous type of Torah learning. It came to support it and not to replace it. So where you saw the most intense practice of Musar, you also would find the most intense Torah learning and observance of mitzvot. And it was so demanding and so difficult that it was very, very hard to keep up with. And those people had to be very, very, very disciplined and paid high prices for that discipline. So I think it's interesting to see that Musar is taught today actually in non-Orthodox settings and through even non-observant Jews. And don't get me wrong, the correction of one's virtues or midot or oneself is always and forever important. But it's also important to understand that the dedication that Salanter has in mind is very, very far from the practice today. And to illustrate it, I'm going to end with probably one of Salanter's most famous lines, which says, "A person is like a bird. They can fly ever so high, but if their wings stop flapping, they will inevitably fall down." Shabbat Shalom.